Hey, good evening, guys. Tonight, with it being Indigenous Peoples Day, I think one of the best books that we could read together is a book by Mark Charles and Soong-Chan called Unsettling Truths, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the Doctrine of Discovery. Let's radically read together. As we work, reside, and rest on stolen land, today it is critical that we reflect on the millions of Indigenous people enslaved, mutilated, and killed for global profit. Christopher Columbus was not a hero, and he discovered nothing. Columbus invaded inhabited lands filled with self-governed people practicing their own culture, art, religion, and speaking their own language. Under an edict from Pope Nicholas V and the Crown of Portugal, Columbus immorally acquired these lands for a European throne. President Trump, in his proclamation on Columbus Day 2020, declared that, quote, "Today, we celebrate Columbus Day to commemorate the great Italian who opened a new chapter in world history and to appreciate his enduring significance to the Western Hemisphere," end quote. Such a declaration ignores the truth that Mark Charles, a man of Navajo and Dutch descent, a writer, a speaker, an independent candidate for the for president of the United States of America, writes in his book, co-authored with Soong-Chan, Unsettling Truths, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the Doctrine of Discovery. In this book that we are radically reading together tonight, he writes, quote, "You cannot discover lands already inhabited. That process is known as stealing, conquering, or colonizing. The fact that America calls what Columbus did discovery reveals the implicit racial bias of the country, that Native Americans are not fully human," end quote. Charles found himself declaring this at an annual event celebrating Christopher Columbus at the statue honoring him in front of Union Station in Washington, D.C., a statue overlooking the United States Capitol. Many gathered at the ceremony with a few non-natives holding signs in protest. Walking amongst the crowd, he found himself shouting, "You cannot discover lands already inhabited." He writes that soon enough, a white man dressed in a suit walked over to him and said, "You are not welcome here," grabbing him by the arm and walking him away from the celebration. How ironic that on Columbus Day, a Native man is not welcome at a celebration. A white man attempts to silence the cries and protests of a Native man, declaring the absurdity of the notion of Columbus discovering lands already inhabited. According to Trump's Columbus Day proclamation, the president would see anyone, especially Charles, as a radical activist seeking to, quote, undermine Christopher Columbus's legacy. He believes that, quote, rather than learn from our history, this radical ideology and its adherents seek to revise it, deprive it of any splendor, and mark it as inherently sinister. They seek to squash any dissent from their orthodoxy. We must not give in to these tactics or consent to such a bleak view of our history. We must teach further generations about our storied heritage, starting with the protection of monuments to our intrepid heroes like Christopher Columbus. In this proclamation, is this truly our nation's history? Or is this a desperate attempt at maintaining a 500-year-old lie? I believe it to be the latter. For what man can determine and distribute the lands of the earth? According to our Native brothers and sisters, the earth belongs to Creator. Even Acts 17, verse 26 states that the Creator has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. According to Scripture, Creator made all of humanity and determined the places on the earth that they would inhabit. Creator made the native people of North America, and this is their home. Some of us came here and claimed it. Others of us were forced here to work it, and more of us have come here to inhabit it. But this remains their land. It remains their land as determined and pre-appointed by a creator. This is critical to understand because according to Charles and Ra, in the book we're talking about tonight, it is the theological doctrine of discovery that permitted the invasion, colonization, and ultimate genocide of native peoples. In fact, Pope Alexander VI offered spiritual justification for European conquest in America, declaring, quote, that in our times, especially the Catholic faith and the Christian religion, be exalted and be everywhere increased and spread, that the health of souls be cared for, and that barbarous nations be overthrown and brought to the faith itself. If we are to tell the truth of our nation's origins, then Charles and Ra reveal that, quote, the doctrine of discovery, this set of legal principles that governed the European colonizing powers, particularly regarding the administration of indigenous land, is the primary legal precedent that still controls native affairs and rights. An international law formulated in the 15th and 16th centuries. Perspective. The legal and political role of the doctrine of discovery is rooted in dysfunctional theological imaginations that shaped the European colonial settler worldview, end quote. In other words, the European Christian church initiated violence against native people 500 years ago under the spiritual belief that they were inherently superior, and the continued gaslighting of such violence and the erasure of those surviving descendants is the evidence of the residue of a continued dysfunctional theological imagination. It was the perversion that is American Christianity that, quote, Columbus's atrocities would find justification in the belief that all of these actions would result in evangelization. The spread of the European version of the Christian message would justify violence in all forms found in Western imperialism. We cannot continue to protect and purport a Christian theology that is complicit in the erasure of native peoples. Today, we should start our journey in disavowing the lie that is the American story. Now is the time for you to seek truth. I close with lyrics from the song Colors of the Wind. Not because Disney is not problematic or that Disney got the story of Pocahontas right, but because the words to me are very powerful. Pocahontas sings, "You think you own whatever land you land on. The earth is just a dead thing you can claim. But I know every rock and tree and creature has a life, has a spirit, has a name. You think the only people who are people are the people who look and think like you. But if you walk the footsteps of a stranger, you'll learn things you never knew you never knew." American history attempts to teach us that the earth is a dead thing men can claim and devour as they please. The narratives of our nation's beginning has fooled many into believing that difference makes death and destruction some people's destiny. Today is a perfect day to read into the lived experiences of our native ancestors and our native neighbors. Today is a day that we must walk in the footsteps, not of strangers, but neighbors, and learn things we never knew we never knew. For the theft and genocide, the American Holocaust of Native people must never be forgotten. Native American author and activist Caitlin B. Curtis, in her book Native: Identity, Belonging, and Discovering God, opens declaring, quote, "I walk with my sons across the Chattahoochee River Trail in Atlanta where we live, and we feel the mud pulse with memory. We feel the trees tell us stories of Muskogee Creek and Cherokee people, somehow far across time and space and blood. They tell us stories of natives, the original inhabitants who walked this land and who walked with Creator. In our native or indigenous identities all over North America, we are diverse, unique with histories and stories that belong to us as peoples. May today be the day we humble ourselves to hear and learn these stories. May today be the day we become radical readers of the Indigenous American story.